Hello readers, welcome back to Sandra is Booked, where I talk all things book and bookish related, and I film some reading vlogs, some book hauls, and everything in between. In this vlog, I wanted to share with you books that are set in the forest because obviously I love books and I love forests. Maybe it's not too obvious, but I think we can deduct that I love books, that's for sure, and books do come from the forest. So it's kind of really cynical if we start to think about it a little bit more, but let's not unravel that. I wanted to read books that are set inside a forest or that partake around a forest, and so I challenged myself to read these 4 books and see what I think and actually be inspired by these books. Obviously there are a lot more books that are set in the forest, but these were the ones that I could find on my shelf that I was really excited to read, and they are all from different genres, so that made the reading experience very interesting. So in this vlog you will see my experience of reading them and my thoughts about all of these books, and I hope you enjoy it. But before we get into the vlog, I wanted to explain briefly why I chose to read books that are set in the forest. The reason why I choose sometimes to make these vlogs is because I myself am writing something that is very similar. So I am writing a book that is set in the forest, so I wanted the inspiration and I wanted to see how other authors view the forest, how do they use it in their stories, do they make it magical, do they make it lyrical, and yeah, I just wanted to get some inspiration, and I actually am using some of these references into my own book, so that's why I did that. And obviously if you want to see how that turns out, you can always follow my other channel, Sandra Makes It Writes, where I talk more about writing and my writing routines, and I have weekly vlogs about writing instead. But that's enough of self-promo, let's get right into the vlog. Alright guys, so these are the 5 books that I want to read for this forest reading vlog, and I'm just gonna go quickly through them, mention their names, titles, and as well as a brief little description and like what kind of format or genre it is. So the first book we have is Ash by Melinda Lowe, which is basically a Cinderella retelling with some different elements, such as there's a high focus on fairies, and actually Cinderella herself is a lesbian in this story. Then we have You Come Too, which is by Robert Frost, and it's a poetry collection basically encompassing Robert Frost's most famous poems. And like I said, every one of these books are set in the woods, and this one is very forest heavy. Then we have Lovely, Dark and Deep by Amy McNamara. This book is basically a YA book. It follows the main character named Ren as she goes through grief. She had just lost her boyfriend in a car accident, and since then she's been grieving, and she retreats to the forest into her dad's luxurious studio in the deep woods of Maine. From there, we see that she navigates further in the lovely, dark and deep woods. Then we have Born with a Toot by Joseph Boyden. So this one is not really taking place on a forest, it's more in the rural area of Canada, more specifically in Ontario. But I thought that I should read this because it kind of like touches upon that feeling of forest. There's a smaller community, and it's basically all short stories, and I'm really excited for this one. And finally, we have the non-fiction Walden by Henry David Thoreau, and Thoreau was known for having gone off for 2 years into the woods where he built his own little home and lived by his own means. In this book, he recalls all the little thoughts and ideas and how he did things in those 2 years. So yeah, that's my list of 5 books. They're all very different from one another, and they're all set in the woods, and I'm super excited. So let's get reading into this reading vlog. I'm reading this book that's set in the forest, and it's called Lovely, Dark and Deep by Amy McNamara. Amy McNamara, anyways, and it was a really good book. But as I started it, I was also starting this poetry collection called You Come Too by Robert Frost, and I was like, okay, this is pretty good. On the 5th or 6th poem in, I saw that it had Lovely, Dark, and Deep, and I'm like, oh wow, is that a reference on this title of this poem? And anyways, it took me like about 3/4 of the book to realize that I was right, it is a reference. So it just so happened that I read 2 books set in the woods and that they correspond in that way. You know, I love some intertextuality, it's pretty interesting. And it just so happens I picked up these 2 books and I had no idea that this title refers to a poem by Robert Frost, so that was very interesting to read. So this book was really good. It handled grief in such an intricate manner. I could relate to a lot of the passages of grief because it is very similar to mental illness. I remember reading the Joan Didion book. What was the book's name? The book's name was, I just read it, The Year of Magical Thinking, where she talks about the grief of losing her husband, and she goes into some of these scientific research about grief and mental illness and how grief is not treated as a mental illness, but the symptoms of grief are very similar. And so that's why I could really find myself in the pages of this book, because the non-verbal responses to grief really resonated with me when I was growing up. So it's really interesting. I really highly recommend this book. It's a YA book. I think it was published in 2013, so it obviously doesn't get any more hype or whatnot, but it was really good and interesting. Also, it was set near a forest, so that was what I was looking for, so this was amazing. I'm almost done with the Robert Frost collection. It's really good. Every poem has a motif of like trees and the woods and farming and pasture, so I really enjoyed this one. I will be using these poems in my book that's set in the forest as well, so this was very good. So hi guys, I want to report on Ash by Melinda Lowe. I finished reading this and I have some thoughts. First thought is that this story dragged out a little bit too much. We all know the canon Cinderella story, so I feel like the setup of this book was way too long and unnecessary. However, I do want to say that I like the fact that it's a retelling that's a bit different. So we have a queer main character and she's coming into her own. I also loved and appreciated the language that surrounded, you know, anything to do with the forest and the lush greenery. That was what I was looking for in the descriptions in, you know, filming this vlog. However, setting wise was great, but plot wise and character wise, you know, it just was very lackluster. This has a little bit of a twist because it has a heavy focus in fairies and kind of like the afterlife type of thing. So in that sense, it was really original on its own, but it was super underwhelming, which is very unfortunate. I neither liked it or neither did I hate it. And I was going through my footages to see if I filmed any clips, and I didn't film anything about this book. And I promise you, I didn't hate it or I didn't like it, but I don't know what happened when I read this one, so I just wanted to put my 2 cents. And I still don't want to say like don't read it, because it was pretty good. I recommend you read it. Probably the things that I didn't appreciate, maybe someone else does really appreciate. I did like the lyrical description of the forest, so that's one thing that I can vouch for. He just completely sat on my arm. It's locked. I need him. And now he's making biscuits. Seriously, Thomas? So since I finished this and I'm currently reading this, I also started just now Born with a Toot by Joseph Boyden, native Canadian author, very famous author. I like his other works that I've read, like 3-Day Road. I read it for my Canadian fiction class. So yeah, these are just a bunch of short stories. Started it, love it already, and can't wait to devour it with my own toot. That's a bad pun. Anyways. read a little bit of the first part, which is on economy, and then it's gonna start, yeah, economy is the first chapter, and it basically talks about like how he survived 2 years and 2 months in the woods by himself, how he built his own kind of little house on Ralph Emerson's land, actually, funnily enough. So he's on economy is basically a section about him, and he's talking about like what he survived on and what he thinks about what he's done. And so it's interesting, at the beginning he's just talking about food and survival, and also he's talking about how we are laborers and we don't think that we have a choice to live a different kind of life, when we do have a choice to live a different kind of life, a life that's not in doom and born of like this slavering labor that we're all born into. And it's so interesting how he's talking about the necessity of life is to keep the heat in life. So say like as animals that we are, in the wintertime we eat more because we want to keep the heat of our body, and then in the summertime we eat less because we want to cool the overheat of our body. And then he looks at it as like fuel, that the discovery of fuel that we have in a fire, and how that adds too much heat and extra heat to our body. I don't know if I'm explaining it well. I underlined that passage. I would read it, but it's kind of long. So instead, if I can find like an essay or like a short chapter version of this book, because I'm pretty sure this is in the public domain, I will insert it in the description. It's called On Economy by Henry David Thoreau, obviously. So really interesting. I feel like this is something that I am going to love and really resonate with. Obviously, I have some skepticism because I live in this capitalistic society, but I do kind of agree with some of the things he says, and I do have that inner, you know, desire of like moving to the woods and just living sustainably by myself. But yeah, I'm gonna continue reading this. I really enjoy it. I really like the way he writes and weaves his words. It's really interesting. It's very meditative. So yeah. So was I in love with Walden by Henry David Thoreau? No. Was I kind of disappointed? Yes. Did I really just read this whole book for just that one line in Dead Poets Society? Also yes, but also it's also set in a forest, and it's Thoreau's life at Walden Pond. It was exciting for me to see how did this guy in the late 19th century survive on his own in the forest. He just basically made his own little house and survived on the crops that he had, and that is kind of admirable. Also a little bit of a extremism over there, you know. It kind of reminds me of Into the Wild, and Into the Wild is one of my favorite books and movies. And so yeah, this guy was really like the trendsetter, let's just say that. Not to be too out there, but I'm just gonna read one passage, obviously my favorite passage, to you, because that's what I came here for. This book is not fictionalized. It's really like his own thoughts and opinions on society, on culture, and on the way we perceive money and economy and our lives and our essence, and you know, like how we've become so reliant on all these things, and all these things that don't really matter or that shouldn't matter compared to the matters of our own brains and hearts. And for that, I really did enjoy it, and I really did agree. But there were some sections where obviously he was just going on a rampage, and it like didn't make sense. He came off as condescending, like condescending old white man. Yeah, like that's how he came off as. But on other points, he really like the way he was explaining the analogies that he explained between us and animals was really interesting. I think honestly, overall, I think it's worth the read. It's not for everyone, but it is a classic for a reason. And yeah, I highly recommend it just for like curiosity's sake, if that makes sense. All right, now I'm gonna relive my Dead Poets Society moment, and I'm going to be basically Robin Williams when he's talking to the boys. Okay, not really. Okay, let's go. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately. Wow, I can't even speak English. Let's try that again. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life, living is so dear, nor did I wish to practice resignation. unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life. So yeah, obviously this quote goes on for a whole paragraph, but that was the main idea, and that's the main idea that's keep on coming up in Dead Poets Society, if you ever heard of that movie and the book that was written following the movie. So yeah, that's why I knew that this one would be an interesting one, and one that's set also in the forest. So that's the end of this forest reading vlog. I honestly really hope that you enjoyed it. It's a bit different. I haven't really seen this kind of thematic in reading vlogs before, so I hope it spiked your interest. I hope it gave you some ideas, and I hope that it will inspire you to pick up one of these books or any other book that is set in the forest. Also, if you have any recommendations of any books that are set in the forest that you think that I will like or enjoy or love, or even that you might think I might be interested in, please comment down below, because I would love to check that book out, and I would love to expand my collection of books that are set in the forest, whether it be fiction or non-fiction, because obviously it inspires me and I love the forest. I love reading about it. And yeah, I'm probably gonna go now and write, but I do want to wish you a happy reading, and I'll see you on the next reading vlog. Bye!